Hello, fight fans, and welcome to another edition of Monday Night Fight Talk. As always, I am your host, Dylan Brewski. We do have a very fun show today. We're talking PFL championship fights. That was a really fun event to watch, actually. We're talking about the UFC 282 shakeup with Yuri Prochazka going down with an injury, vacating the title, and explaining that whole situation. And then we will be doing predictions for UFC Fight Night in Orlando, headlined by Stephen Wonderboy Thompson and Kevin Holland. But let's start off with the PFL. I'm just going to go in order of the championship fights. I mean, it was a really fun event. Like I said, first off, the light heavyweight title. This for 2022 on the line, Robert Wilkinson taking on Omari Akhmedov. This was an incredibly impressive performance by Robert Wilkinson. He has really come into his own. He was fighting at middleweight. I think that was a big weight cut for him. He is a little small for the light heavyweight division, but I do think that is a more natural weight for him. He is incredibly powerful. He has tremendous striking. And in this fight, he had great takedown defense. He had an incredible plan. He must have seen something that Omari Akhmedov was doing in previous fights, because he absolutely picked him apart for, I believe it only happened this fight ended going into the third round, I believe. Maybe going into the fourth round. But, I mean, Robert Wilkinson completely dominated this fight. He was landing clean shot after clean shot after clean shot. He controlled this whole fight, was landing nasty punches, and also every time that Omari Akhmedov was shooting for a takedown, he was hitting him with that uppercut every single time. So congratulations to Robert Wilkinson being the first Australian PFL champion. So that's very exciting for him and the country / continent / whatever you want to call it of Australia getting their first PFL champion. Next up was Sadabo C taking on Delano Taylor in the welterweight title bout. This was by no means the most entertaining fight in the world. This was probably, out of the 6 championship fights, I would say this was probably the most boring, per se. I mean, it wasn't a bad fight by any means. It was a good fight. It was good technical striking on the side of Sadabo C. He controlled the distance the entire time, throwing nasty kicks basically the entire time. There just wasn't a high output from either guy, which is okay. But there was a clear winner in this one. I think Sadabo C, he did win this fight by decision. But I think that was the right call. He was just a little bit more active. He was landing the bigger shots, a.k.a. the kicks, that he was throwing to the legs and body of Delano Taylor. But also, he showed great progress in his takedown defense. They were talking about it in the broadcast, but there was a few times Delano Taylor had him pretty deep where Sadabo C is just hopping on one leg. Like, he's about to get taken down, and he was able to get out of it, where even just a year ago, you wouldn't see that from him. He would have been taken to the ground and probably controlled for a big majority of the round. So congratulations to him on winning his welterweight title. By the way, I mean, this might be the only time in PFL history, aside from obviously season 1, that we had 6 new champions. 6 people that have never won a PFL championship. So I thought that was really cool as well. But moving on from that little side note, the lightweight championship bout between Olivier Aubin-Mercier and Stevie Ray. This was shaping up to be an incredibly close fight. OAM came out and had a great first round using leg kicks to his advantage. He had some brutal leg kicks in both rounds, but especially that first round, he was using them to his advantage big time and hurting Stevie Ray big time with those kicks. I would say that OAM probably got that first round. Second round came, Stevie Ray got a pretty early takedown. He controlled him for a big majority of the round. Actually on his back, body triangle, full on. He was controlling that second round. And eventually, towards the end of the round, about 90 seconds left in the round, OAM was finally able to get him off his back and then hit him with a brutal counter right hook as Stevie Ray was coming in and just completely knocked him out cold. Absolutely nasty punch by OAM. I've always liked OAM. I loved him when I believe he was on one of the seasons of The Ultimate Fighter. I thought he was very intriguing then. Of course, when he was in the UFC, I watched him then. So very cool to see his career kind of come full circle, him able to win a big championship. Granted, it's not UFC, but PFL ain't that much of a drop down from UFC. So huge congratulations to OAM. That was a very good performance and shaping up, like I said, to be a very fun fight before he completely knocked out Stevie Ray. Now for the shortest of our championship bouts, Ante Delia taking on Matisse Scheffel, the heavyweight championship on the line. It was looking to be a big, fun fight between two big name fighters, two big guys going back and forth. Delia didn't really seem to respect Matisse Scheffel, his grappling, his power, or really anything, because Delia was just moving forward. He was straightforward the entire time. He was able to land a big flurry, drop Matisse Scheffel, and capture the title that he was so close to getting last year before running into Bruno Capolosa. But he was able to get it this year, so congratulations to him. There was a lot of people there for him. I believe it was either Randy Couture or one of the guys on the broadcast booth that were like, there is a lot of big Croatians right behind me right now. So very cool to see Mirko Cro Cop's protege, Delia, get that title. So congratulations to him. Also, the co-main event, the featherweight title on the line, Brendan Loughnane taking on Bubba Jenkins. Brendan Loughnane put on the show of his career in this fight. He was absolutely fantastic in this fight. I gotta say, there was some impressive performances in every single one of these fights. I'm not taking anything away from anybody else in this fight. That was the most impressive performance out of the 6 championship fights. Loughnane looked on point in everything that he was doing. Great takedown defense. His striking was just laser accurate. And this isn't to say that Bubba Jenkins stood no chance in this fight. Bubba Jenkins had some bright moments. He was throwing bombs, and if they would have connected, Brandon Loughnane probably would have been sleeping. And he did attempt quite a few takedowns, but early on in the fight, Brendan Loughnane started attacking those legs and basically just took Bubba Jenkins' lead leg out of the fight. He didn't have the spring that he usually does to get those takedowns, and Brendan Loughnane was able to keep it on the feet where he was far more comfortable. Eventually, the volume of the strikes just caught up to Bubba Jenkins. He got dropped, and Brendan Loughnane got the 4th round TKO victory. And now for the main event, probably the biggest shocker in PFL history, maybe. The undefeated Kayla Harrison is finally dethroned. Her first professional MMA loss to Larissa Pacheco. It was an incredibly close fight. This was a great fight from start to finish, just back and forth between these two. The first round was certainly not that close. Kayla Harrison was able to get a fairly early takedown, control Larissa Pacheco for a big majority of that round. It did end back in like a stalemate position or maybe on the feet. I can't quite remember. But there was Kayla Harrison clearly won that first round. Second round was a huge turnaround for Larissa Pacheco. Kayla Harrison shot for another early takedown, and Pacheco started to grab that neck. They go in a scramble. Pacheco ends up on top, controls her for a big majority of the round. They end up on their feet, and Larissa Pacheco definitely had the advantage on the feet in this fight. She used that to her advantage. She probably took that second round, or we know she took that second round. Round 3 was probably the closest round. I would say between these two, either the third or the fifth. Both of them were fairly close, but I would say that this was probably the closest round. Both ladies kind of going back and forth. I do believe Kayla Harrison took that round, though. I had her going up 2-1 after 3. But then once again, Pacheco comes back with a big round 4. Was able to control the distance, take a win, evening it up at 2 apiece going into the 5th round. It was just an incredible performance because then that 5th round comes. Like I said, it was fairly close, but I do think there was a clear winner in that round. And I think it was Larissa Pacheco. Obviously, all 3 judges agreed. They had Larissa Pacheco winning by unanimous decision. So huge congratulations to Larissa Pacheco. I mean, to take down someone like Kayla Harrison, who, I mean, we've seen it. I've talked about it personally. Like, we didn't really see an end in sight for Kayla Harrison losing any sort of momentum because she was just so dominant. But humongous victory for Larissa Pacheco. Congratulations to her. Again, one last congrats to all 6 of the champions. That's Robert Wilkinson, Sada Bossi, Olivier Aubin-Mercier, Ante De La Hia, Brandon Loughnane, and Larissa Pacheco are your 6 $1 million winners and title holders for the next year at least. So congratulations to the 6 of you fighters. But that's enough for PFL because we got some big news that happened this week. Some very unfortunate news as well with, I guess, now the former light heavyweight champion Yuri Prochazka goes down with a very serious shoulder injury. Gonna require surgery. Out for probably at least a year, maybe more than that. This is very unfortunate for him. He, being the person that he is, we all know that he is kind of just one of those guys that if he's not going to be able to do anything with the title, he doesn't want it. So he ended up vacating the title to not hold the division up. And it just speaks so much to the person that Yuri Prochazka is. The UFC then promoted the co-main event to the main event for the vacant light heavyweight title. And that was Jan Blachowicz, the former champion, and Magomed Ankalaev, the number 3 contender, to fight for the vacant title, which posed the big question. I see this, and my first question is, where's Glover? Glover's was already going to fight Yuri Prochazka for the title. Why is he not fighting Jan Blachowicz or even Magomed Ankalaev? The more time went on, the more we found out. I really don't agree with the UFC's decision on this. They offered Glover originally Magomed Ankalaev. Understandably so, Glover said, I can't fight Magomed Ankalaev on 2 weeks' notice. A little bit more than 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks' notice. Because, I mean, Magomed is a completely... the spectrum of Yuri Prochazka and Magomed Ankalaev, 2 completely different fighters. And a fighter that Glover Teixeira has never seen before. Glover says, if you want me to fight Magomed Ankalaev, it's going to have to happen in Brazil in January. I need more time. UFC, I understand this point. UFC says we can't do that. We need the title fight for this one. I am 100% on board with that. I totally agree with that decision to have the title fight on this pay-per-view here. Because you don't have the Nate Diaz, you don't have the big names on this pay-per-view that you could promote to the main event and still get decent sales on it. So I see them not wanting the 283 Brazil championship fight. Then he comes out and he says, I'll do a rematch with Jan Blachowicz. And this is where I don't agree with the UFC decision of saying no to that, because they've already seen it before and they believe Magomed Ankalaev deserves the title shot. And while that might be, I think Magomed Ankalaev is amazing. I thought before this got promoted to a championship bout, I thought Magomed Ankalaev is a future champion in the light heavyweight division. But you have Jan Blachowicz, a former champion, Glover Teixeira, a former champion. You have the number 1 contender, Glover Teixeira, the number 2 contender, Jan Blachowicz. I just don't understand why you take Glover out of the picture completely just because you don't want to see a rematch of Jan Blachowicz and Glover Teixeira. I kind of understand it. And the fact that, both of these guys are in late 30s, early 40s. They're not the youngest fighters in the world, where Magomed Ankalaev is, I believe 28, 29 years old. So he still has some time left. But it also just sucks for Glover Teixeira. He was put in a horrible position. I don't blame him for not wanting to fight Magomed on such short notice, because that's an incredibly hard fight in general to take on short notice. Like I said, I think Magomed Ankalaev was a future champion before he got promoted to this main event. I'm okay with Jan Blachowicz versus Magomed Ankalaev for the title, but also I just wish it didn't come at the expense of Glover Teixeira, who has done so much for the UFC. He was the Cinderella story of last year, or maybe it was last year, where he wins the title at age, 41 at the time, maybe even 42. The journeyman of the UFC, been around for so long, been in so many big fights. It sucks to see him taken out of this position just because the UFC didn't want to see Jan Blachowicz and Glover Teixeira again. I would have personally watched that fight again, but I'll also watch Jan Blachowicz and Magomed Ankalaev fight for the vacant title. Just sucks that it has to go at the expense of Glover Teixeira. But let's get into some predictions now. We have UFC Fight Night Orlando. This is a great card for a fight night. There's some big fights. I'm not going over all the big fights, like Angela Hill, Emily Ducat. I'm not going over Eric Anders, Kyle Dawkins. I'm not going over Roman Dolidze, Jack Hermanson. Originally, I was going to go over that fight because Jack Hermanson and Derek Brunson were fighting. That's a big fight. I don't see Dolidze. I think Dolidze is good. I don't think he's quite ready for Jack Hermanson yet, to be fully honest with you. So I'm not going over that fight. The first fight I am going to go over is in the women's flyweight division. This fight's on the prelims, but I think it has serious abilities to be a very, very fun fight. And that's Tracy Cortez and Amanda Ribas. Tracy Cortez has been absolutely dominant since losing her pro debut by rattling off 10 straight wins. She is 10-1, lost her pro MMA debut, and then rattled off 10 straight, including 4 bouts in the UFC, winning all 4 of her bouts in the UFC so far. She has tremendous grappling. She can hold her own on the feet. She's definitely more comfortable on the ground, but she's no slacker when it comes to the feet. Amanda Ribas has had her ups and downs with some key wins to get her in the position that she's in. She has wins over Mackenzie Dern. She has wins over Verna Jandrova. But she's also lost 2 of her last 3. One at strawweight to Marina Rodriguez and one at flyweight to Katlyn Chookagian. Ribas is very similar to Cortez. She has great grappling. She has fairly good striking. I would say Amanda Ribas has a slight advantage in the striking department, but it's not a whole lot. This is a very, very tough fight to call, but I am going with the 10-fight win streak of Tracy Cortez to end on Saturday, December 3rd. I'm going Amanda Hebus by decision. Next up, we have a huge matchup in the heavyweight division. Top 5 matchup in the heavyweight division. With how the UFC likes to put every single heavyweight fight as the main event, I am incredibly shocked this is not the main event. Tai Tuivasa taking on Sergey Pavlovich. This is going to be an absolute brawl between two of the hardest hitting heavyweights on the planet. I am so pumped for this fight, and I don't see it going down to the ground unless someone gets rocked. It is another very hard fight to call just because of the fact that both of these guys can put your lights out in seconds. That's how seriously good these two guys are. But I am going with Tai Tuivasa to avenge his loss to Cyril Gane earlier this year. I'm going to Tai Tuivasa by second round KO. Next up, going all the way down to the flyweight division, Matisse Nicolau and Matt Schnell, a very intriguing matchup in the flyweight division. Both guys are good grapplers, looking to stay on the winning track. Matisse Nicolau has been on a tear, winning his last 5, his last 3 being against ranked fighters. I believe at least 2 of them are in the top 10 along with it. Matt Schnell is looking to start a win streak of his own after beating Sumo Darje earlier this year, snapping his 2-fight losing streak. Snapping the 2-fight losing streak he was on. But I'm going to go with the guy who has all the momentum right now. Matisse Nicolau is a serious contender. I'm going with Matisse Nicolau by decision. Now, our co-main event of the evening, Bryan Barberena taking on RDA Rafael dos Anjos, 2 gritty veterans going back and forth. RDA is looking to avenge his loss earlier this year to Rafael Fiziev by taking down the guy who has been on a roll versus fellow veterans just like RDA. He has 3 straight wins. The first one was not to a veteran. That was to Darian Weeks. But then the last 2, he beat Matt Brown. And then he went on to beat Robbie Lawler. I would say those 2 back-to-back, that's a pretty good start to win streak. RDA himself needs no introduction. With his resume, the former lightweight champion, the former welterweight title contender, interim title contender, faced some of the greatest fighters ever in both divisions, has great striking, great grappling, a veteran in the truest sense. Bryan Barberena has been such a fun fighter to watch as of late. He has an incredible chin, a gas tank that seems to never empty, or if it does, he doesn't care, and just completely ignores it. While Bryan Barberena has had great success versus these veterans as of late, he hasn't faced one as good as Rafael dos Anjos is at this point in his career. That's no disrespect to either Matt Brown or Robbie Lawler, but they're not the fighters that they were in their prime. RDA, he's not the same fighter he was in his prime, but he's still pretty darn good, I have to say. I'm going with Rafael dos Anjos by decision. And then that leads us to our main event of the evening. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson taking on Kevin Big Mouth Holland. Very fun fight to end off a very fun card overall. The former title contender, in my opinion, he beat Tyron Woodley in at least one of those fights. He should be a former champion. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson looks to rebound after almost a year off following his second straight loss late 2021. Granted, those 2 losses are to 2 top 5 welterweights in Belal Muhammad and Gilbert Burns. Kevin Holland, always a fun fighter to watch. He was a part of that crazy scramble of UFC 279 where he got the pleasure for lack of a better term, to face Mr. Khamzat Chimaev, who was just flat out too much for Kevin Holland. And you can't really blame Kevin Holland a whole lot. You're not preparing to fight Khamzat Chimaev, chances are you're going to get dominated by Khamzat Chimaev. But aside from that, he has shown a lot of success since going back down to welterweight. He won his first 2 fights back down at welterweight. I'm interested to see how this fight pans out because I do see Kevin Holland trying to take this fight to the ground. I believe this is pretty new, but he is a black belt in jiu-jitsu now. So he has an excellent ground game, but it's going to be a matter of if he can get Stephen Thompson to the ground, because I do think Stephen Thompson has the advantage of on the feet. I mean, look at the striking ability of Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. There is very few better strikers in the UFC, in the history of the UFC. I will go out on a limb and say that, than Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. I mean, he's just absolutely fantastic. I don't see Kevin Holland being able to get Stephen Thompson to the ground. I see Thompson controlling the distance, picking his shots just a bit better. In a close matchup, I'm going with Wonderboy by decision. That's all I have for you this week. Next week, I'll be reacting to UFC Fight Night Orlando, possibly one on Prime Video as well. And, of course, I will be here to predict UFC 282. Very excited to be with you all next week. Thank you for tuning in this week. I hope you all enjoyed the show. But again, that's all I got for you. I will see you all next week, same time, same place on YouTube for Monday Night Fight Talk.